Hello, this is Sue O'Leary Hall, the Academic Director of Thesan Coaching and Training, and this is a vlog for the parents of Thornton pupils at Cundall Manor School. This week I've been working with Thornton to think about how they start preparing for their GCSE revision journey, and there are a few sort of hints and tips within this vlog for parents to help support pupils at home. We are going to be working with the pupils in a bit more depth next term, and there should also be a face-to-face parent seminar for Thornton parents, which will give you much more detailed advice. But this is just a sort of short 10 to 15 minute vlog of starting points really to support your child as they prepare to revise for their GCSEs next summer. I'm just going to break it into a few key areas. The first one being organisation and prioritisation, then thinking about when and where they revise, how they make what they've learned stick, if you like, and how they manage their exam stress as they start to move towards those mock exams and real exams next summer. So first things first, getting themselves organised. We've looked today at how pupils can prioritise their GCSE workload, and the principles of prioritisation apply both for their day-to-day prep and also for their revision. They've been introduced to a very simple traffic light model. So when they receive a piece of prep or when they start to think about which subjects they're revising and in what order, we recommend that they use the traffic light model as a starting point to decide what to do first. So when they have, for example, a list of prep, they would go through that list with three highlighters, a pink one, a yellow one, and a green one. The pink highlighter is used as a red traffic light, if you like, for a piece of prep or a piece of revision that they know is going to be tricky and that they are not sure perhaps what to do. So anything that looks like it might be problematic or is going to require a lot of time and possibly some additional support, they would prioritise as a red traffic light, so that's a pink highlighter. Pieces of prep or revision that they know will take some time but they believe they can achieve on their own with enough time spent, they would be highlighted in yellow, so that would be an amber traffic light. And pieces of prep or revision that they think, actually, I know what I'm doing with this, I know how to do it, I just need to crack on and do it, that's going to be a green highlighter, so that's a green traffic light. So we'd recommend every night when they come home with their prep diary, go through each of the pieces of prep, red, amber, green. How much time do I need to spend on this? Obviously, something that's red, especially if it's going to need some additional support, is going to be top priority and they need to allow the most time for that. And it might be that a red traffic lighted piece of prep or revision might need more than one session. So we'd recommend that they do that piece on the night that it's set, and then if they've got stuck with it, they've got time to go and get some additional help. So we'd recommend that as a very sort of simple way of organising and prioritising their workload, both for prep and for revision. The other thing that is worth considering that we've discussed with pupils today is what the Americans call the idea of eating the ugly frog first. We all recognise that sort of image of the pupil looking at their list of prep or list of revision and seeing that the subject they find the most challenging and thinking, oh, I'll do that later, I'll leave that, I'll come back to it when I'm fresher or when I've had a really good night's sleep. And of course, it's the thing that ends up being the last priority because they don't want to do it. We really do need to try and encourage pupils to do that first, to eat that ugly frog first, because actually, as I mentioned earlier, if it's something that is really tricky and they're going to need additional support, they need enough time to be able to seek that support and apply what they've learned to that piece of prep or revision. So if you as parents, if we as parents, I'm a parent too, are able to encourage them to do the hardest thing first, that is really valuable as a lesson for them, not just for GCSE, but in their future working lives as well. And we also recommended the idea of saving their favourite task or their least tricky or least challenging task for the last one of a prep or revision session, so that it kind of gives them a lift, if you like, at the end of the session, so they're ending sessions on a positive note and feeling good about themselves, feeling they've achieved something. So very simple tips for organisation and prioritisation, and we'll come back to some of these when we do our face-to-face seminar, but good starting points hopefully for them to get some habits in place now. The next area is when and where to revise. It might be that they tend to do all their prep in their bedroom. If they've got their bedroom set up with, a desk space that works well and they're in really good study habits, that's fine. Obviously, if you've got a teenager who is easily distracted, it's probably worth having them doing some prep and revision somewhere that you can supervise them, even, perhaps not standing over them, but being in the next room where you can just pop in and make sure that they're not on their phone and they are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. If it is possible to get them out of their bedroom, that would be useful from the point of view of just being able to have the bedroom as a bit of a haven, if you like, a bit of a sanctuary for somewhere to go after they've finished their prep and their revision, so that not everything is happening in their bedroom, because there's nothing worse than waking up first thing in the morning and looking at a great big pile of books on the desk and thinking, oh gosh, I've still got all of this to do. And equally, if you've got a teenager who finds it tricky to go to sleep, it can be hard to go to sleep when you are looking at a load of work that you still haven't yet done. If it's not possible for them to work somewhere else in the house, something as simple as just throwing a sheet or something over their books so that they're not looking at those first thing when they wake up and last thing when they go to sleep. Just trying to get them into that habit of their bedroom being a place where they can relax and decompress after a long revision session or a hard day at school. Thinking about the best time for them to do their prep and to revise. You'll know yourself what's your teenager's optimum study time. Are they a lark or a night owl? Very few teenagers are great first thing in the morning, but if you have one that is, then it might be worth getting them to think about doing their hardest bits of prep or their hardest bits of revision early doors before school if they are up in time. And again, if you've got a teenager who works best later on in the evening, trying to get them into the habit of not working really, really late and then impacting on their sleep. Because if they are working till 10, 11 o'clock at night, the chances are they're going to need to wind down before they go to sleep. And then we end up with a very compressed sleep period, which may well not be enough. So you may have tiredness knocking on from one day to the next. The National Sleep Federation recommends teenagers need 8 to 10 hours a night. So trying to get them into those habits of having enough sleep is going to be really critical. When we're thinking about preparing for GCSE exams, it's very much the idea of a marathon rather than a sprint. So this business of trying to be in good study habits where they do some revision most days, it might only be a short amount, just getting into those habits early and building that up. So we know that actually if teenagers spend, say, 15 minutes at 4 or 5 times a week from now up to the exams, just doing some very simple revision activities, and I'll talk through some of those in a minute, that could give them an extra 30 to 40 hours of additional revision across that whole GCSE period. So it's not necessarily about having great big long revision sessions, certainly not at this stage, but it's about building habits now of doing a little bit of revision most days, as well as the prep that they're doing, so that we build up those layers of knowledge, if you like. When we're trying to get teenagers learning to stick, we need to think about the idea of layers of knowledge, as I mentioned. So it's known as interleaving, but it's this idea that actually teenagers need to come back to what they've learned repeatedly. When I was at school, we used to do a sort of blocked revision where you'd revise for one subject and you tick that off and that was it, and we're done and dusted, and then we just do it in the exam. Now, actually, that is not a really good way of helping what we've learned stick, because unless we repeat and reuse what we've learned and rehearse those things regularly, our ability to hold that information in our long-term memory is going to be significantly inhibited. So what we're trying to think about with teenagers now is practicing something that they've learned regularly. So it might be every couple of weeks they go back over something they've learned. So a very simple practice that we can get them into the habit of now is, after they've been in lessons, at the end of each day, for each subject, just take 5 to 10 minutes, have a look through what they've learned, re-represent that in some way. So it might be that they do a quick mind map, or they make some brief bullet points, or perhaps they even record some voice notes on their phone. And then a week later, re-represent that in a different way, use what's called a different memory channel. So if they've done something visual in week 1, try doing something auditory in week 2. And then in week 3, go back and test themselves on what they've learned. So the idea of testing is really, really important. And it's very important for teenagers that we use low stakes testing. And what I mean by that is testing where the results don't go anywhere, don't count for anything. Because when we have very high stakes testing, that is when teenagers tend to get really quite stressed. And when we're stressed, we forget what we've learned. So getting them into the habit now of practicing and rehearsing what they've learned, re-representing it in different ways, and then testing themselves on that is a really good way of helping build up, if you like, those layers of learning that are needed for long-term memory retention. There's some really great simple ways of testing. They've learned things like challenge grids with me today. They can use something like a Kahoot quiz that they can set up themselves. They could do that with a friend, and they could each take a topic and create a quick quiz and test each other. It doesn't have to be more than, a sort of 5, 6, 7 minute test. So it doesn't need to be something that feels onerous and hard to either set up or actually have a practice at. But actually, if they create something like an online quiz, then they could test themselves on that every week or every couple of weeks and build up those layers of knowledge. And what research tells us actually is that the business of testing, even if they don't get all of it right, the business of testing builds memory trace. It helps to embed learning. The very act of having to really think hard to retrieve information helps to deepen that learning within the long-term memory. And what we're trying to do is help teenagers to be able to move what they've learned from their long-term memory back into their working memory and do something with it regularly. That act of retrieval is what helps to keep it fresh as they build up towards the exams. So very, very simple techniques there. We have shared with pupils today what we call a booster grid, which has lots of different revision activities that your teenager could try. Some of them are really quick. They might be 5 or 10 minutes. Some of them might take a bit longer, 25 or 30 minutes. And the idea is that the teenagers choose the activities they fancy doing, but they do them regularly. They make it part of their day-to-day learning life, if you like. And over the coming weeks and months, the more they're able to do that, the more they're able to make revision and revisiting, rehearsing and testing the things that they've learned part of their day-to-day learning life, the better they will achieve in those forthcoming exams at GCSE, because the deeper layers of learning have been embedded over a prolonged period. That's what helps make learning stick. And the last thing I just want to mention is exam stress. You may well not be seeing any of this yet. It might be a bit early, but at some point you may see some of the symptoms of exam stress in teenagers. So if your normally lovely, delightful, friendly, chatty teenager has become a bit sullen or a bit weepy or just tricky to deal with, it may be that they're starting to feel the pressure of those exams. Now, we've talked today about some very simple stress management strategies, and we'll talk in a lot more detail about those in the face-to-face seminar next term. But a very simple analogy I just want to share with you that we've shared with the teenagers today is that of the stress bucket. You might know this, and if you do, that's great, but if you don't, here it is. So the stress bucket is the idea that we all carry around with us a certain amount of stress. And depending on previous experiences and depending on all of the different things that we've got going on in our lives, that determines how full our stress bucket is. So if you live an absolutely charmed life and you have lots of money and you've got servants who look after you and you don't have to work for a living, the chances are you don't have a huge amount of residual stress in the stress bucket. So if something happens that is a little bit stressful, you've still got capacity in your stress bucket without it overflowing and becoming a problem for you. However, most of us don't live a perfect, charmed life. And if we are already, or our teenagers are already, quite full in terms of the amount of stress we're carrying around, then a small amount of additional stress could be enough to make our stress bucket overflow. And that's when we start to see those trickier behaviours like snapping, being distant, being grumpy, refusing to do any revision, refusing to help at home. All those kind of things are signs that the bucket, if you like, is overflowing. Now, the good news about the stress bucket is that it has a tap on it, and it's possible to release stress out of the tap. and that reduces the overall amount of stress within the stress bucket. So what we've been looking at with Thornton today is very simple strategies to release stress from their stress tap so that the bucket of stress doesn't overflow and make them feel overwhelmed. We have looked at things like, for example, getting outdoors, seeing friends, regular exercise, the kind of activities that give teenagers a sense of achievement and connection and enjoyment are the ones that tend to be the most productive in terms of releasing stress. So achievement, it could be something like playing football in a team or doing really well at something that they enjoy. It could even be something like achieving the next level of a video game. Obviously, that is something that we need to approach with a little bit of caution as parents in terms of how long we have teenagers on their device. But actually, if they're working hard and that's the way that they socialise with their friends for an hour or so each evening, that can be absolutely fine. So it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. Connection is an important one in terms of releasing stress and general sort of emotional well-being, not just for teenagers but for all of us. So an activity that enables them to connect with another sentient being. It might be their mates, it might be taking the dog for a walk and playing with a pet, but something that enables them to connect on some kind of emotional level helps certainly to release stress. And obviously it needs to be something that they enjoy, something they want to do, something they look forward to. And planning things to look forward to, very simple things, short things each day, really, really important. And then over the coming weeks, something at the weekend, something in the Christmas holidays, things that are little milestones, things that give them something to look forward to as a break from the hard work that they're doing in the revision that they've started. Okay, hopefully that just gives you a starting point of how we might get these Thornton pupils on their way with this revision journey. I'm really looking forward to working with them again next term and to seeing you face to face. But for now, take care and thank you very much for being with me.